Hey folks, I am Troy and you're watching TroyTube. Today we're going to talk about some DTF printing, and we're going to address some things that I think a lot of people struggle with their DTF printers, the shaker, the oven, the take-up spool, things like that. And we'll also talk about some things from a consumer standpoint. All right, so one of the things I want to get out of the way up front is that DTF printing is not for the faint of heart. I have a lot of people that ask me or message me and say, can you recommend a DTF printer? And most of these people that are asking are, just your casual crafters and maybe serious crafters or whatever. And I don't think people really understand sometimes with DTF printing that with really with any large printing format, whether it's DTF or latex or anything, it's not as simple as just loading up a printer, having it there when you need it, being able to print, like having a laser printer or an inkjet on your desktop. These things require a lot of maintenance, a lot of care, and they're expensive. Parts are very expensive, print heads are expensive, supplies are expensive, and if you're not printing in enough of a volume, then you will probably run into more issues, not just from clogged heads from not using the printer and things like that, but not remembering what to do, quite honestly, from one print job to the next, because there are a lot of things you have to do to manage them, care for them, and you have to really babysit them. I joke, I say I have to rub my printer's shoulders before I print and make sure she's going to behave. So we're going to talk about some of those things today. If you're looking into getting a DTF printer, if you're not printing a lot of volume, if you're not doing a lot, I would suggest ordering transfers from us or someone else to add to your garments, and sticking with it that way. Buying a DTF printer, if you're doing 10 shirts a week or something like that, just isn't really cost effective. Like I said, there's a lot to managing them, and it's not something that you just have around for when you need it. DTF printers need to be ran. They need to run a lot. They need to be cared for a lot. So keep that in mind when you start thinking about getting your own DTF printer. Now we're going to be taking a look at the printer we have, which is from a company called HeyMe. They're a Chinese company, and they do pretty good support. They have a Facebook group and everything. And I've gone through a lot of things trying to figure out all the nuances and things that I think a lot of people struggle with, and I think I've nailed it down pretty tight, and I'm going to share that information not just with people who have this particular printer set up from this company, but I think a lot of them are very similar setups, and a lot of people struggle with the same things. So we're going to talk about all the things that I've gone through in the recent weeks and months in getting our printer down to where I can print and religiously rely on it and not have to worry too much about what's happening. Now this is going to probably be a long video, so you might want to grab a cup of coffee and watch and go through this. It's been a really tough road for me to figure this out. I'm an electronic engineer. I've been around these wide format printers for a long time, and there's a lot of things I struggled with and really had to figure out. I'd be less than honest if I didn't say I was ready to push it into the river a couple of times. The biggest thing I've had problems with is the film feeding straight from all the way from the printer, from the feed roll all the way through to the take-up roll on the other end. It has to go through the shaker and the oven and then to a take-up spool. And these take-up spools have always kind of been a problem, because if you don't get it on there perfectly straight as it winds, it will kind of telescope to one side or the other. And I've figured out what causes a lot of the problems that I've seen people post and ask questions about. And so we're going to go through this from one side to the other to show you how I load the roll, how I make sure it's straight, the things that I've done, some things I've done a little bit differently from what the manufacturer recommended. And I think that's because everyone's setup and environment is a little bit different. I think there's probably a little bit of variance in some of the equipment, maybe some variance in the film you're using, just all these different things, different factors. I told somebody the other day, I said, it's kind of like a golf swing. I said, if you don't do 50 things just perfect, slice. you know, hook, whatever. And the printing is kind of the same way. And so we're going to move the camera around here, and I'm going to start with loading the roll and what to look for in the things that I've experienced, and share that with you guys. All right, just showing this for the pit folks that haven't really seen a printer set up like this before. So we have the feed roll on the back of the printer. It feeds through the printer, of course, and these rollers all have locking mechanisms that lock them down into place. And then the film goes down into the shaker, which is where the powder gets applied. And you see I've added an LED strip to mine so I can see down in there really brightly and not have to have a flashlight. And I also have a little camera here so that I can kind of see it on my monitor and just kind of keep an eye on that powder while it's printing. And then it goes through the oven and comes out and is then taken up on this feed roll. And so we're going to take a look at how we load this and get straightened up and feeding all the way through without going crooked or bubbling up and causing head strikes. All right, so one of the first things I want to point out is having your printer and cabinet assembled properly and having everything square and level is extremely important. And so with this particular setup, I have this flap here, and the printer is scooted up as far as it can go all the way against this so that it maintains an equal distance from here, from the printer to the cabinet on both ends. And so if your printer is not square, and if your printer should be level with the cabinet. Now, you should get everything, you know, as level overall as you can, and then make sure that your printer and cabinet are equal, both in squareness and level and height, so that the film is not, you know, touching on the far end but not touching over on this side or anything like that when it's going down into the shaker. Now, some of these principles you can probably apply to some of the other setups that are very, you know, some of them different. They have vertical ovens and vertical shakers and things. So, you know, some of those things may be a little different, but you might be able to apply some of the same principles to different setups that apply to what I'm showing you here. Now, the first step, of course, is getting your roll loaded and centered and fed through the printer and started. So what I'll usually do is put it through there and then get it in far enough to lock one wheel down just to hold the film up there. And one of the couple of important things from the feed roll aspect is the tension that's on the roll. Now, the manufacturer recommends that this be a fairly loose roll, not loose enough that it will spin and unroll itself, but then tighten it just a little bit to where it won't do that. But I found that my printer will actually not feed the film straight if it's very loose. So I actually keep quite a bit of tension, as you can see here. And on this particular setup, there's a knob on each side of the roll that controls that tension. Now, the other thing about your film being fed straight into the printer is if your roll is over to one side too far, you'll see that it starts to get a wrinkle in it, you know, whichever way that it goes. So you may have to bump it a little bit left to right to get that tension the same on both sides of the film as it's going into the printer. And then you can also see sometimes that it will start to come off the edge a little bit or go over that way as it's feeding off of the feed roll if it is not lined up properly. And then you can tighten it down and lock it into place. Now, again, the manufacturer recommended that this be very loose, but I get very good results with it being a fairly tight roll, regardless of how much or how little is on the roll and the weight of the roll and all those factors. And without it being tight, it does not feed the film straight. I even tried to unroll some of it just so that I could test it, and it always feeds crooked no matter how straight I load it in. And the tension on this roll seems to keep it very straight when I do that. And so once it's in place, you can lock it in by tightening your set screws down there. Now, getting your film lined up and fed through the printer straight is extremely important. And I tend to use the little holes from the vacuum to line that up from the front to the back. And it's always good to have a good reference point so you can watch it while it's printing and make sure it's not walking to one side or the other as it's printing, because if it does that, that will ultimately cause a bubble in your film, and your head will scrape on the film and then probably cause a head clog, if not damage the heads. And I use a little reference point here. I actually use this little sticker, and you'll see that my film goes right past that little black line, and it makes it real easy for me to look at it from time to time and see if that is see any movement or shift in that as it's printing. If it's very minor, if it's only like 1 millimeter every 30 feet or something like that, I don't worry about it. But if I feed it a few feet and I see it start to move quite a bit, then I'll readjust and realign, adjust tension and everything. Now, as I mentioned, I have installed an LED strip underneath of this to illuminate the powder area so that I can see what's going on in here. I have that little camera mounted and have that up on my computer monitor, so when I'm printing I don't have to constantly get up and come over and look and see how much powder is in it. You want, typically, what I've learned, when I first was working with it, I thought maybe this powder limiting bar that's in here that has the little ends and the little steel rod, I thought maybe that was causing my film to feed crooked, or it's pulling it to one side. Turned out that that is not the case, and I've talked to other people who thought the same thing as well, and that is a very important piece. If you have this powder limiting rod, it saves you a ton of time to not have to constantly add powder to your film in your shaker. And so the film will feed all the way through. It will come down through the oven, and then I keep one of these little strong magnets on here so I can just kind of pin it up there and not have to worry about it, because if that comes off, it will fall all the way back down in there and I'll have to feed it through the oven. So let me put the camera back on the tripod and I'll show you how I load the film and put it on the tape roll. One of the important things I do is I get 2 pieces of tape ready and just kind of tack them onto my fans here so that they're ready. I use 1 piece of tape on each side of the film. Do not use one in the middle, because that gives it a pivot point. It can go crooked easier. And the other important thing is that with the powder, to have plenty of powder in that powder limiting rod in the shaker so that there is weight on the film. And this makes gravity your friend. And the gravity of that powder will help keep tension on this film so that you can get it attached and centered on the roll properly. Now what I do is I'll pull the film down. I'll make sure that the roll is loose so I can move it back and forth. And another important thing are these guides that I made. I actually sell these on our website at treelinecustoms.com for $14.99 with free shipping. And they just, they're really quite simple. There's some folks out there selling these that are 3D printed, and they're a little bit more complicated. It looks like they slip on and you have to maybe cut your tube because it's kind of an extension. With this, you don't have to cut the tube or anything. It's just a kind of a donut that gets sandwiches between the roll and the plastic piece where it mounts. And you pull the film down around behind it like this, keeping good tension on both sides. And if you want to make sure it's really straight, you can pull it all the way around and make sure that your film here matches up and is in alignment with the film back there. But typically, if you keep good tension on both sides so that there's good tension there on the left and right, and hold it while you tape it on each end, it's going to wind really smoothly and consistently. And then one of the things you want is make sure your film is pretty centered up here. Your oven doesn't get quite as hot along the edges. So if it's really off to one side, you're going to want to make sure that it's feeding straight through from one side all the way back to the feed roll and through the printer and everything by visually looking at the alignment of the edges. Now, once I feel like I have that centered where I want it, I can lock this into place. And now we're going to talk about the things that you're going to want to watch for when you're printing. And this is just very important things that you have to keep an eye on. I look at my printer every 5 or 10 minutes while it's printing just to see if there's any kind of variance happening at all, because very small variances can cause some very big problems. Now, another thing that I do a little differently than the manufacturer's recommendation was on the vacuum and stirring. The recommendation was to set both of these to, I think, 70 or 75. I actually found that vacuum on 30 and stirring on 50 for me works great. If the vacuum is turned up too high, it can cause the film to shift worse as it's printing and feeding through. Now, one of the worst things that can happen is to have a head strike. And what causes this is if the film gets a bubble in it, or if it gets any air between the film and the surface here, that's what the vacuum does. It tends to pulls that film down. But if the film gets crooked on one side or the other, it can back up like this and cause a bubble, and then the head will scrape. We actually had this happen before I caught it. It scraped for about 12 or 14 inches. It severely clogged the heads, and I had to replace both print heads. When I replaced the print heads, the very first print job, it did it about 3 feet into the print job, and I had to replace a print head again. So $1,500 later, we were struggling with this, and I decided to really go through this and just had to really figure it out. And that's some of what I'm sharing with you here today. And we're going to talk about what causes some of those bubbles in the film and wrinkles here in just a minute. Now, one of the other modifications I made in my printer, I'm a little bit more brave than most people probably, but there is a flapper under here. If I push the film down, you can see it through the film, and this flapper spins and shakes the film to shake off the excess powder. And I'll turn it on for a second here. So you can see how it shakes the film. And one of the things it did was it caused the film to bounce a lot back here. I'll show you in the powder here. This is a very similar. This has like a rubber thing on it, and it's on the same thing on that flapper down there. And so I actually trimmed off on this piece about 1/2 inch so that it hits the film less, and I can run it faster, and it tends to vibrate the film rather than bouncing it too much. And that has really reduced some of the bounce on the film here, which affects, if you start to get those bubbles when the film's going crooked, it makes it worse and causes it to bounce more. So that was a modification I did to mine as well. You may want to consider that, but again, I'm a little bit more brave than most people when it comes to these kind of things. Now I'm going to turn the thing on for a moment here, and I'm going to show you how this film bounces back here, and then I'm going to turn it off so you can hear the camera, hear me better over the noise. Okay, and while that was running, you should have been able to see that this film is bouncing a little bit here. And if the film is feeding straight from beginning to end, one of the things that you can watch is that the film on that side and this side will be bouncing pretty equally. If you start to see that one side appears tight and the other side bouncing, or vice versa, then your film is starting to shift from one side to the other. Whether it's feeding crooked here, you'll have to watch it and kind of measure it and see if it's feeding crooked there. But I found the more common problem is that the take-up gets out of alignment, and the film is telescoping as it rolls up and is moving from one side to the other, or I just don't have it lined up properly here. But the walking, telescoping is the biggest problem. And what happens when that happens is if the film on the take-up roll over here starts to walk to the left, it will get tighter on the right, and then this side will bubble up over here. And same way, if it starts to walk the other direction, then the other side starts to bubble up and the other side gets tight. And those are one of the key things I just look for when I take a peek at my printer, every 5 or 10 minutes while it's running, just to make sure that nothing is changing, and because it does not take much at all for it to cause a problem. Now, what I will usually do, since I've been using these guides, life is a lot easier. Let me tell you, these make a huge difference. They are worth their weight in gold to keep that film straight on the roll. Now you see there's a little tiny gap there. It's not quite as wide as the space, but that little bit doesn't matter. Sometimes it will, just walk a little bit to that side, then go back. It'll stay within these two guides here, and like I said, those things are worth their weight in gold. And that was really the final piece to me figuring out how to make this work the best. Now, if it starts to get off of alignment, and you start to see up there where I was talking about the film bouncing and it starts to bubble up on one side or the other from being out of alignment here, It does not take much of an adjustment at all. So you can loosen the screws down here, and I will move this in whichever direction is appropriate by no more than 1 or 2 millimeters at a time, and then go look at it up there and see if it corrects that little bounce. And those are the biggest things by far. Using the weight of the powder and the powder limiting bar to keep tension on this while you're loading it, using the side guides here, keeping your film tension tight all the way across, using tape on both sides, and just making sure that it's feeding all the way through without any problems. And so to recap that, I have good tension here, equal tension on both sides of the film coming through the printer. I use my holes, vacuum holes, to line it up to make sure it's straight from front to back. I use the line on this sticker to watch as I'm printing. Again, while it's running and the shaker is running, I'm watching it bouncing here, making sure that the bounce on the film on both sides is pretty equal. Keeping plenty of powder. This is actually a little bit less powder than what I normally run in it. Usually I keep the powder up close to the bar underneath of that. I keep a lot of powder on there with that thing, and it will last quite a long time. And then you just turn it on every once in a while to keep it full. And then, as I mentioned, making sure your film is coming out straight, using the guides on the ends of the roll, and making sure you have good equal tension on both sides when you bring that around and tape it on both ends. Do not tape it only in the middle, or it will pivot as it rolls up. Okay, now aside from properly loading the film like I've shown you and making sure all these things are in alignment and it's going to feed through the printer and take up on the roll completely straight all the way through. That's extremely important. It's extremely important to watch. I can't stress that enough about how you have to take your time and be very meticulous about loading the film, because if it's not loaded straight, you will get a wrinkle, you will get a head strike. You can end up in a bad situation. Like I say, it cost us $1,500 to get back up and running after we had a couple of head strikes and a lot of learning experiences. So there's a few things that you're going to want to keep on hand as well. Of course, those rings, the side guides to put on the take-up roll. Again, $14.99, treelinecustoms.com, free shipping, and we'll send you a set of those out. You're going to want to keep a few other things handy. I keep a little thing of alcohol, paper towels, your capping fluid. I actually bought this little bottle at Dollar Tree because it has a little flip top on it. Makes it easy to put the capping fluid in for your heads. And another thing I keep on hand is a can of this goof off. This is not the oil-based stuff. This is the solvent stuff. It's kind of like kerosene or something. It has a really strong odor, so make sure you're well ventilated if you use this. What I do is every couple of days I'll open up the oven. Especially do this when you're loading film. That's a perfect opportunity to clean and maintenance your printer. Your oven bed, mine is a flat bed, and it gets a lot of excess powder on it sometimes, whether it's me putting powder in and I have a mishap with the powder, which I should mention, when you handle the powder, wear a dust mask, because this stuff aerosolizes and you're inhaling resin powder. That's not good for your lungs, not good for your body, so wear a dust mask when you're handling the powder. But that oven, if it gets excess powder on it, which it will do over time, it will eventually get sticky, and the powder will turn into adhesive, and it will stick the film to the oven, and then it won't feed through smoothly, and then it'll start burning and melting your oven, your film inside your oven, and cause you all kinds of problems, and it'll cause the film to back up and bubble, just like the other things I mentioned. And so every few days I give it a wipe down with goof off and make sure I get as much of that adhesive and powder off there as I can. Also, after I do that, I kind of go over it with a little bit of alcohol and a paper towel, wipe everything down along the edges, typically of the oven. You'll have moisture form and build up. It's kind of a yellowish looking liquid. You'll want to keep that wiped down so that it doesn't drip on your transfers or anything you're working on. And just give it a good cleaning every couple of days. It really depends on how much you're printing. Now, the other thing that is important is the cleaning of the heads. What we do is before we print, we run a head cleaning. That will, and do a nozzle check to make sure everything looks good. If it doesn't, then you might have to do a couple head cleanings. You may have to soak it in the cleaning solution, blue cleaning solution, overnight. You just put that on your capping wells, hit enter, and let it close everything up, and you can turn the printer off and let it soak overnight, or maybe even 24 hours, and usually clear up any of those minor problems you have with head clogs. But I always run a cleaning before I print, do a nozzle check, make sure everything looks okay. While it's printing, the head is going all the way across, and I'll do this kind of quick. I'll get a paper towel, put a little alcohol on it, and I'll wipe down the little blue rubber wiper that uses to clean the head. So when the printer goes all the way to the left, I'll get a swipe in and clean it. And not everyone wants to do it that way, but like I said, I'm a little brave. So 2 or 3 wipes on that to clean that wiper off really good, because when I'm finished printing, I will run another head cleaning and then put my capping solution in the capping wells, hit enter, and shut the printer down. So I do a head cleaning before I print, do a head cleaning when I'm finished printing for the day, and sometimes I'll do head cleanings in between print jobs. So if I'm printing 15 or 20 feet and I get an opportunity where there's a break in the print jobs, I can stop it for just a minute to run a head cleaning, then I'll do that. That will help make sure that you don't print a whole roll or something and find out you had a head clog and have lines in your prints. The way I wind it, showed you to wind it on the take-up roll, it also allows you to see your print on the printed side. So if you're having any major problems, you might be able to spot those there as well, rather than rolling the backwards where you're looking at the adhesive side. You can't really see what's going on with it. Now, the last tip that I've got is for when you turn your oven on. So we have a problem where a lot of people have it melting their film while it's heating up. And the reason it's doing this is because the elements turn on and they stay on until the temperature reaches the set value. Manufacturer's recommendation was 140 degrees Celsius on the oven. That was way too hot for my environment, and I'm assuming that just everybody will find their preferred setting for this. I run my oven at 105. I was running at 100, but then I started to have a little bit of problem with the if I printed things that were closer to the edges of the film, that those weren't curing. So went up to 105, 110, 115, start experimenting to where I could find the best level of heat without going too high. In other words, the minimum amount of heat that would cure the entire sheet for me was 105 degrees. And so you might want to experiment with that as well and see where your temperature range falls. But what happens is when you turn that oven on, it starts to heat up and stays on and gets really hot right on that film while it's printing and trying to feed through, and it tends to melt the film or at least burn it. So what I do is, once I start printing, I'll set it for 50, and then I'll wait till it gets to 50, and then as the print job gets a little bit closer to going in, I'll go up 10 degrees at a time and let it set for a minute or two at that level. So I'll go to 60, let it set for a minute or two, go to 70, let it set for a minute or two, until I work my way up to 105. And typically, if I'm up to around 100 or 100, even 90 or above, as my prints are starting to go into the oven, then I need to be up around that 100, 105 level. And that keeps all my film from melting. I don't have any problems with burning, anything like that. And I can print, everything goes through almost seamlessly when I do that. I still, because of the paranoia, like I said, get up and look at it every 5 or 10 minutes. But for the most part, everything is trouble-free printing. So the biggest key, again, the last piece was I put on were these rings, $14.99 at treelinecustoms.com, and we'll send a set out to you. And you just, like I said, you have the kind of a knuckle there where the tube goes on, and you just put that ring on there and then slide the tube on and sandwich it in between, and that will keep your film straight as it rolls up. So hopefully this has been helpful to you guys. There's a lot there. Like I said, it's like a golf swing. If you don't do all 50 things right, then you're going to have a problem. So hopefully that's been helpful to you.